The fluorescent lights of Vance and Merriweather Accounting hummed their usual tired song, a sound that had become the metronome of Elara Vance's existence. She sat at the very back desk, a sturdy oak relic pushed against a wall that hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since the last recession. Her desk was a landscape of organized chaos, stacks of tax code manuals, a calculator with keys worn smooth, and 3 different colored highlighters lined up with military precision. A half-eaten blueberry muffin sat on a napkin, a small, private rebellion against the firm's unspoken rule of no food at desks. Elara was a landscape herself, soft, rolling hills of curves, encased in a sensible navy blue cardigan, a body that the world, and especially her boss, Gerald Merriweather, seemed to find perpetually in the way. She was tracing a line of figures on a depreciation schedule for a local bakery, her brow furrowed in concentration. The numbers were a language she'd always understood, a clean, logical syntax in a world that often felt messy and unkind. A tiny, almost imperceptible discrepancy in the date format on a supplier invoice caught her eye. It was a Tuesday. The date was printed as 03/14/24, but the accompanying delivery docket was stamped 14/24, a European format, a tiny, insignificant detail to anyone else, but to Elara it was a red flag, a hairline crack in a seemingly solid wall. She made a small, precise note in the margin with her purple highlighter, a color she reserved for anomalies. This was her hidden talent, the one that no one in the office celebrated. She saw the ghosts in the machine, the tiny temporal and bureaucratic inconsistencies that whispered of errors, or worse, deliberate deception. The front bell chimed, a jarring, cheerful sound that sliced through the low hum. Elara didn't look up. The front of the office was Gerald's domain, a stage for his thinning hair and practiced, obsequious smile. She heard the rustle of expensive fabric, the sharp click of leather-soled shoes on the linoleum, and a sudden, frantic scuttling sound that she recognized as Gerald's panic mode. "Mr. Castellan, what an unexpected honor." Gerald's voice was pitched too high, a nervous flute. Please, come into my office. Can I get you a coffee? An espresso? We have a new machine." A deeper voice, smooth as riverstone and twice as cold, cut him off. "My time is limited, Merriweather. My CFO tells me your firm flagged a concern on the quarterly entertainment expenses for the Meridian Hotel Group. I want to see the analyst who found it." Elara's heart gave a single hard thump against her ribs. The Meridian Hotel Group. That was her file. She'd spent 3 nights last week cross-referencing catering invoices against event permits, finding a pattern of overcharges that amounted to a clever, slow-drip embezzlement. She'd flagged it, written a meticulous report, and handed it to Gerald, who had taken the credit, as always. She heard Gerald's panicked whisper, a frantic, sibilant hiss. "Of course, Mr. Castellan. It was a team effort, a routine audit. My senior associate, Mark, he's our forensic specialist. He's just stepped out for a client meeting. Terribly unfortunate timing. I can walk you through the findings myself. I oversaw the entire—" "I don't want the overseer," the cold voice, Julian Castellan's voice, said. "I want the person who saw the pattern, the one who noticed the caterer's license number was 1 digit off on 3 separate invoices. That's not routine. That's a specific kind of mind. Where are they?" A shadow fell over Elara's desk. She looked up, her purple highlighter still poised in her hand. Gerald was standing there, his face a mask of strained apology, his eyes darting nervously towards the front of the office. Behind him, filling the narrow corridor, were 2 men. One was a mountain in a suit, a slab of granite with a coiled wire in his ear. The other was Julian Castellan. He was not what she expected. She'd pictured a brute, a caricature of violence. Instead, he was lean and tall, with the kind of controlled stillness that felt more dangerous than any overt threat. His hair was the color of dark, bitter coffee, swept back from a high forehead. His eyes, a startling pale gray, were fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. He wore a charcoal suit that looked like it had been poured onto him, and his presence sucked all the air out of the cramped back corridor. Gerald's smile was a rictus. Ah, yes, this is Elara. She handles our overflow filing. A very diligent member of the support staff. Elara, if you could just locate the Meridian file for Mr. Castellan, Mark will be back shortly to discuss it. He was trying to erase her, to reduce her to a pair of hands that fetched things. Elara felt a familiar, cold wave of humiliation wash over her. The back desk, the support staff, the body that was meant to be hidden. She straightened her spine, a small, defiant gesture that made her cardigan strain slightly across her shoulders. She met Julian Castellan's gray gaze without flinching. "The Meridian file is on my desk, Mr. Merriweather," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm the one who found the discrepancy." Gerald's face went blotchy red. "Elara, don't be absurd. You were just assisting Mark with the data entry. Mr. Castellan, I apologize for the confusion. My staff sometimes get a little overzealous in their desire to contribute." Julian Castellan didn't even look at Gerald. His gaze was a physical weight on Elara. He took a step closer, and she caught a scent of cold air, cedar, and something else, something dark and smoky. "You," he said, his voice low, "explain the caterer's license to me." It wasn't a request. It was a command, but it wasn't unkind. It was the tone of a man who valued precision and had no time for pretense. Elara took a slow breath. She reached for the file, her fingers steady. "The catering company, A Taste of Tuscany, submitted 3 invoices for events at the Meridian's ballroom in February," she began, her voice gaining strength as she entered the familiar territory of data. "Their business license number, as registered with the city, ends in 782. On the first invoice, it's printed as 782. On the second, it's 782. But on the third, for the Valentine's Day Gala, it's printed as 782B, a suffix that doesn't exist on their official registration. It's a small detail, but it suggests the third invoice was generated from a different template, likely a fraudulent one. When I cross-referenced the headcount on that invoice with the fire marshal's permit for the event, the numbers were inflated by 40 guests. Someone pocketed the cost of 40 non-existent plates." She finished and looked up. Gerald was a statue of frozen fury. The mountain in the suit looked vaguely impressed, but Julian Castellan's expression was unreadable. He just stared at her, those pale eyes tracing over her face, her cardigan, her hands resting on the open file. He wasn't looking at her body with the dismissive, sometimes disgusted glance she was used to from men like Gerald. He was looking at her as if she were a complex equation he was trying to solve. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elara Vance." "You're not support staff." It was a statement. "I'm a certified tax consultant with a specialization in forensic accounting," she said, and she couldn't keep the edge of bitterness from her voice. "I've been with the firm for 4 years. Julian's gaze flicked to Gerald for the first time, a brief, lethal glance. "Merriweather, you have a forensic accountant with an eye for detail that my own people missed, and you have her doing overflow filing?" Gerald sputtered. Her role is primarily back office. Client-facing isn't her. She's not." He couldn't say it. He couldn't say she's not the image we want to project. Julian Castellan's smile was a thin, sharp blade. "I'm not interested in your firm's aesthetic choices, Merriweather. I'm interested in competence. Ms. Vance, I have a much larger problem than a few $1,000s in inflated catering bills. I have a leak, a significant one. Millions of dollars are vanishing from my legitimate holdings, and no one can tell me where it's going. My CFO is incompetent. My internal auditors are either blind or bought. I need a fresh set of eyes. Your eyes. Elara's world tilted on its axis. The back desk, the humming lights, the blueberry muffin. It all felt like a stage set that was about to be struck. "Mr. Castellan, I have a full caseload here," she said, the automatic protest of a woman who had been conditioned to stay in her lane. "No, she doesn't," Julian said, his eyes still on her. "She's just been seconded to a private consultancy. Consider it an executive loan. You will be compensated directly, and handsomely. My car is outside. I'd like you to come to my office now and look at something." It was not a negotiation, but as he spoke, something shifted in his tone. The cold command was still there, but underneath it, she heard a faint, almost imperceptible note of something else. Desperation? No, that was too weak a word. It was the controlled urgency of a man who was surrounded by enemies and had just found a single, sharp, reliable tool. He wasn't looking at her like a tool, though. He was looking at her like a lifeline. Gerald took a blustering step forward. "Now, see here, Castellan. You can't just walk in and poach my staff. There are contracts, non-competes." Julian didn't turn. "Marcus," he said, and the mountain in the suit, Marcus, smoothly stepped between Gerald and Elara, a wall of silent, immovable muscle. "Merriweather, your contract with Ms. Vance is a matter of public record, and is, I'm sure, as flimsy as your ethics. I'm not poaching her. I'm borrowing her. And if you ever want to see another client from my network of companies, you will smile, wish her well, and go back to your office." The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. Gerald's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. He looked at Elara, and for the first time in 4 years, she saw something other than dismissive annoyance in his eyes. She saw fear. It was a heady, terrifying, and utterly delicious feeling. Elara stood up. She smoothed down her cardigan, a nervous habit. She picked up her purse, a sensible leather satchel, and then, on impulse, she picked up her purple highlighter and slipped it into the pocket of her cardigan, a tiny totem of her competence. "I'll need the complete general ledger for all entities under the Castellan umbrella for the last 5 fiscal years," she said, her voice surprisingly firm, "and unrestricted access to your accounts payable and receivable databases." Julian Castellan's thin smile widened, just a fraction. It almost reached his eyes. "You'll have it." He gestured down the corridor. "After you, Ms. Vance." She walked out of the back office, past the stunned faces of her colleagues, who had been pretending not to listen, past the apoplectic Gerald, and into a world she had only ever seen from the outside. The black car waiting at the curb was a beast of polished metal and tinted windows. Marcus opened the door for her, and she slid onto a seat of soft gray leather that smelled of wealth and power. Julian got in beside her, his presence filling the space, and the car pulled away from the curb, leaving Vance and Merriweather accounting and Elara's old life shrinking in the rear window. The drive was silent. Julian spent most of it on his phone, his voice a low, clipped murmur of Italian and English, a language of deals and veiled threats. Elara stared out the window at the city sliding past, her mind racing. She was in a Mafia boss's car. She, Elara Vance, who spent her Friday nights doing jigsaw puzzles and rewatching period dramas, was being driven to the heart of a criminal empire to find millions of missing dollars. A hysterical giggle bubbled up in her throat, and she choked it down. This was real. The leather was real. The silent, terrifying man beside her was real. They arrived at a tower of blue glass and steel that pierced the city skyline. The Castellan Enterprises logo was a discreet, brushed metal emblem in the lobby. They rode a private elevator to the top floor, in a silence that was thick enough to chew. The doors opened onto a sprawling penthouse office suite. It was all clean lines, pale wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a godlike view of the river. It was the polar opposite of her cramped, cluttered back desk. This was a space designed for power, for a man who needed to see everything and everyone coming. A sleek, anxious-looking man in a suit that cost more than Elara's annual salary scurried up to them. "Mr. Castellan, I have the preliminary reports on the shipping subsidiary, but there are some anomalies in the currency conversions that I think—" "Later, Arthur," Julian said, not breaking his stride. He led Elara past a conference room with a table that looked like a slab of polished obsidian, past a glass-walled office where a beautiful, sharp-featured woman was typing furiously, and into a vast corner office. This was his sanctuary. One wall was a bookshelf filled with leather-bound volumes that looked like they were actually read. Another held a collection of vintage maps. His desk was a massive slab of dark wood, completely clear, except for a single, slim laptop and a framed photograph turned away from her. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair facing the desk. He didn't sit behind it. Instead, he leaned against the front of the desk, crossing his arms, looking down at her. It was a power play, but it also felt strangely intimate, as if he were closing the distance between them. "I've had my internal team, a forensic firm from New York, and a very expensive private investigator look into this. They all tell me the money is gone, untraceable, lost in a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. They tell me it's a rival family, the DeLucas, siphoning funds through a sophisticated cyber attack. I don't believe them." "Why not?" Elara asked, her professional curiosity overriding her personal terror. "Because it's too clean," Julian said, his gray eyes boring into hers. "A cyber attack leaves a digital signature, no matter how well it's hidden. This feels like a ghost. The money doesn't vanish in a single, dramatic hack. It bleeds out, slowly, quietly, from accounts that should be airtight. It feels like someone on the inside is opening a vein. Someone I trust." The last word was laced with a venomous, personal pain. He pushed off the desk and walked to the window, his back to her. The city sprawled beneath him, a kingdom of light and shadow. "My family is complicated. Loyalty is a currency, and it's constantly being devalued. I have a cousin, Lorenzo. He runs the charitable arm of the family, the Castellan Foundation. A brilliant, charming man. He builds hospitals, funds scholarships. He is the beloved public face of our name. He is also the only person other than me with high-level access to the central holding accounts, a necessary evil for the legitimate transfer of funds to his projects." He turned back to face her, and the cold mask had slipped. Beneath it was a raw, exhausted fury. "I don't want it to be him, but my gut tells me the answer is in the Foundation's books. I've had people look. They find nothing. It's a masterpiece of legitimate accounting. I need someone who can see the thing that isn't there. The tiny, wrong detail that everyone else is too blind or too scared to find. Can you do that, Ms. Vance?" Elara's heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was bigger than inflated catering bills. This was a family war, a betrayal of blood. She thought of her purple highlighter, of the European date format on a simple bakery invoice. She thought of Gerald's blotchy, dismissive face. She was tired of being the back desk girl. She was tired of being overlooked. "I can try," she said. "I need a secure terminal, the Foundation's complete financial records for the last 7 years, and a very large pot of tea. Earl Grey, if you have it. Julian Castellan stared at her for a long moment. Then, a genuine, surprised laugh escaped him. A low, rusty sound that seemed to startle him as much as it did her. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines, making him look younger, almost vulnerable. Earl Grey, he repeated, as if the words were a foreign language. I'll have it brought in. You'll have everything you need. Arthur will set you up in the office next door. He paused, his gaze intensifying. Ms. Vance, if you find what I'm looking for, the reward will be more than just money. You will have my personal gratitude, and in my world, that is a currency more valuable than anything in those ledgers. The next 3 days were a blur of numbers. Elara was installed in a pristine, glass-walled office adjacent to Julian's, a space that felt like a fishbowl. She worked with a focused intensity she hadn't known she possessed, fueled by endless pots of Earl Grey and a burning need to prove herself. The Foundation's books were, as Julian had said, a masterpiece. They were perfect. Every donation was accounted for, every grant meticulously documented, every expense receipted. Lorenzo Castellan was either a saintly, efficient philanthropist, or he was a genius at hiding his tracks. Elara dove into the minutiae. She wasn't looking for a smoking gun. She was looking for a ghost. She cross-referenced grant recipient addresses with property records. She analyzed the metadata on scanned invoices. She built a timeline of every major donation and cross-checked it against Lorenzo's publicly available travel schedule. Nothing. The man was clean. Frustration gnawed at her. She felt the weight of Julian's expectation, a palpable pressure from the office next door. He would often stand by the glass wall separating their offices, a dark silhouette watching her work, a cup of black coffee in his hand. He never interrupted, but his presence was a constant, silent question. On the evening of the 3rd day, exhausted and bleary-eyed, she was reviewing a batch of grant disbursements to a children's hospital in the south of the city. It was a large, recurring grant, paid quarterly. The paperwork was immaculate. The hospital's acknowledgement letters were on official letterhead, signed by the Director of Development, a woman named Dr. Helena Marsh. The signatures were all consistent. The dates were all correct, but something was itching at the back of Elara's brain, a tiny, persistent splinter. She pulled up the previous year's disbursements for the same hospital. She laid the acknowledgement letters side by side. The signature of Dr. Helena Marsh was identical, a looping, elegant script. But on the letter for the 2nd quarter of last year, the blue ink of the signature was a slightly different shade. A minute, almost imperceptible difference in hue. To anyone else, it was the same blue pen. To Elara, who spent her life staring at documents, it was a scream. She pulled up the 3rd quarter letter. The ink was back to the original shade. The 4th quarter, the different shade again. Her heart began to race. She pulled up the digital scans of the invoices from the hospital's supposed medical supply vendors. She zoomed in on the logos. On the genuine letters, the hospital's embossed logo was slightly offset, a tiny printing quirk. On the letters with the wrong blue ink, the logo was perfectly centered. They were forgeries. Beautiful, high-quality forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. She started digging with a frantic, adrenaline-fueled energy. She followed the thread. The payments for the forged quarters hadn't gone to the hospital's main account. They had been routed through a secondary account, a project-specific fund that, on paper, belonged to the hospital but had a different routing number. She traced the routing number. It led to a small private bank in the Cayman Islands. She cross-referenced the account's creation date with Lorenzo Castellan's travel schedule. He had been in the Caymans, ostensibly for a philanthropic conference, 3 days before the account was opened. It was circumstantial. It was brilliant. It was the ghost she'd been hunting. But she needed one final, irrefutable piece of proof. She needed to tie the account directly to Lorenzo. She remembered the tiny detail from the bakery invoice, the date format. She started looking at the timestamps on the digital authorization logs for the fraudulent transfers. All of the transfers had been authorized from a single IP address. She ran a trace on the IP address. It didn't belong to the Castellan building or any of their known properties. It was registered to a residential address in a wealthy, gated community on the outskirts of the city. The address of Lorenzo Castellan's private villa. Elara leaned back in her chair, her body trembling. She had it. She had found the missing millions. They weren't stolen by a rival family. They were being bled out, quarter by quarter, by the beloved cousin, the saintly philanthropist, hidden in plain sight within the accounts of a children's hospital. The betrayal was so profound, so deeply layered in virtue, that it took her breath away. She stood up, her legs shaky. It was late. The office floor was dark and silent. She walked to the glass wall of her office. Julian was in his office, sitting behind his desk, the lamp casting a lone pool of light. He wasn't working. He was just sitting there, staring at the framed photograph that was always turned away from her. He looked utterly alone. She tapped lightly on the glass. He looked up, and his expression shifted instantly from weary contemplation to sharp alertness. He crossed to her office door and opened it. "You found something." It wasn't a question. "I've found everything," Elara said, her voice hoarse. "It's not the DeLucas. It's Lorenzo. He's been forging documents for the Children's Hospital grant, routing the money through a shell account in the Caymans. I have the IP address. It's his house." Julian's face went completely still. The color drained from it, leaving his skin looking like sculpted marble. The cold, controlled mask didn't just slip. It shattered. For a fleeting second, she saw a devastating grief in his pale eyes, a pain so raw and personal it made her chest ache. He had suspected, but to have it confirmed, to have the betrayal made real, by a stranger in a glass office, was a different kind of wound. He didn't rage. He didn't shout. He just stood there, absorbing the blow. Then, he did something that shocked her. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were cold, but his grip was strong, almost desperate. "Show me," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Show me everything." She led him to her terminal and walked him through the evidence, her voice gaining confidence as she pointed out the ink shades, the logo alignment, the IP trace. He listened in absolute silence, his eyes fixed on the screen. When she was finished, he straightened up. The grief was gone, replaced by a terrifying, Arctic calm. The Mafia boss was back. "You've done in 3 days what my entire organization couldn't do in 6 months, he said, his voice quiet and lethal. "You are extraordinary." He said it not as flattery, but as a simple, undeniable fact. "Tomorrow, we will have a meeting, a full board meeting of the Castellan Foundation. You will present these findings." "Me?" Elara's voice squeaked. "Mr. Castellan, I'm not a presenter. I'm a back-office analyst. I find things. I don't do boardrooms." He turned to face her fully, and his gaze was so intense it pinned her to the spot. "You are not a back-office anything, Elara. You are the smartest person in any room you walk into. And tomorrow, you will walk into a room full of people who have underestimated you your entire life, and you will show them exactly who you are. I will be right there. No one will disrespect you. No one will interrupt you. You have my word." The next morning, Elara stood in front of the floor-length mirror in her small apartment, a wave of nausea washing over her. She had tried on every outfit she owned. Everything felt wrong, too frumpy, too cheap, too back desk. She finally settled on a deep emerald green dress she'd bought for a cousin's wedding 3 years ago and never worn again. It was a wrap dress, and it hugged her curves in a way that was both professional and undeniably flattering. She left her hair down, a cascade of dark waves, and put on a pair of modest gold hoops. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman she barely recognized, a woman who looked capable, a woman who looked seen. Marcus picked her up in the black car. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval, which from him felt like a standing ovation. The drive to the Castellan building was silent, but it was a different silence than before. It was a silence filled with anticipation, not fear. The boardroom was on the same floor as Julian's office. It was the one with the obsidian table. One entire wall was a sheet of glass overlooking the city. As Elara walked in, flanked by Marcus, the room fell silent. Around the table sat a dozen people, a mix of sharp-suited executives and older, more casually dressed men, who had the hard eyes of soldiers. At the head of the table sat Julian, his expression unreadable. To his right was a man who could only be Lorenzo. Lorenzo Castellan was everything Julian was not. He was golden and smiling, with warm brown eyes and an easy, charismatic charm. He radiated trustworthiness. He stood up as Elara entered, a gesture of polished courtesy. "Ah, you must be the famous Ms. Vance," he said, his voice smooth as honey. "Julian has told me about your unique talents. We're so grateful for your fresh perspective. Please, sit." Elara didn't sit. Her heart was a trapped bird in her chest, but she forced her legs to carry her to the foot of the table, opposite Julian. She placed her leather satchel on the polished obsidian and looked directly at Lorenzo. "I won't be sitting, Mr. Castellan. This won't take long." A flicker of surprise, quickly masked, crossed Lorenzo's handsome face. Julian leaned back in his chair, a ghost of a smile on his lips. He gave her an almost imperceptible nod. "Go on." Elara took a deep breath. She pulled out the first set of documents. For the past 3 years, the Castellan Foundation has made quarterly grants of $2.5 million to the St. Jude's Children's Hospital South Campus. A noble cause. The paperwork is flawless, except for this. She laid out 2 acknowledgement letters side by side. The signature of Dr. Helena Marsh, the hospital's director of development. On the genuine letters, the blue ink is a standard, commercially available shade. On the letters for the 2nd and 4th quarters of each year, the ink is a proprietary shade, cerulean mist, only available through a specific high-end stationer. A stationer, I discovered, that is located 2 blocks from your private villa, Mr. Castellan. Lorenzo's smile didn't waver, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. "This is fascinating, Ms. Vance, but a coincidence of ink shades is hardly proof of anything." "I agree," Elara said, her voice growing stronger. So I looked deeper. She pulled out another stack. "The hospital's official letterhead has a printing defect. The embossed logo is 1.5 millimeters off-center. On your letters, the logo is perfectly centered. They are high-quality forgeries, printed on a professional-grade machine." A machine, I discovered through a purchase order, that was bought by the Castellan Foundation's Arts and Education Outreach Program and delivered to a storage unit rented in your name. She was on a roll now, the adrenaline turning her fear into a sharp, crystalline focus. She laid out document after document, building an irrefutable wall of evidence. The Shell account in the Caymans, the IP address from his villa, the timestamps that coincided with his personal travel. With each new piece of evidence, the color drained further from Lorenzo's face. The charming smile became a fixed, desperate grimace. The room was so silent, Elara could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "The money wasn't stolen by the DeLucas family," she concluded, her voice ringing clear in the silent room. It was stolen by you, Mr. Castellan. You used a children's hospital as a front. You forged documents. You betrayed your family's trust. The missing millions are sitting in an account in the Cayman Islands. Account number 482-9M7721. And the only person with the access codes and the authorization to move them is you. She finished and stood there, her chest heaving, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't look at Julian. She kept her eyes locked on Lorenzo, watching his world crumble behind his panicked eyes. Lorenzo's composure finally shattered. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "This is insane! Julian, you can't believe this! This fat nobody accountant over your own blood. She's been paid off by the DeLucas. It's a setup." The word fat hit her like a physical blow. It was the word she'd been waiting for, the word that had been whispered behind her back her whole life, finally spoken aloud in a room full of powerful people. She felt her face flame, the old shame threatening to drown her. But before she could even react, Julian moved. He was out of his chair and around the table with a speed that was terrifying. He didn't touch Lorenzo. He just stood in front of him, his body a coiled spring of menace. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "You will not speak to her," Julian said, his voice a low, deadly whisper that was more frightening than any shout. "You will not look at her. You will not even think about her. Your opinion of her body is less than irrelevant. It is an obscenity coming from a man whose soul is so rotten he would steal from sick children." He took a single step closer, and Lorenzo flinched back, stumbling against his chair. "You are done, Lorenzo. Your accounts are frozen. Your access is revoked. You will leave this city tonight, and if I ever see your face again, I will not be this merciful. The only reason you are not leaving here in pieces is because of the work she did. Her integrity is the only thing saving your life. Remember that." Lorenzo's face was a mask of pure terror. He looked around the room, at the hard, unforgiving faces of the other men, and saw no help. He was a dead man walking. He straightened his suit jacket with a shaky hand, and without another word, walked out of the boardroom, a ghost of his former charming self. The silence that followed was deafening. Julian turned to Elara. The lethal coldness in his eyes softened, replaced by something that looked like awe. He walked towards her, and the other men at the table, as if on cue, quietly stood and filed out of the room, leaving them alone in the vast, glass-walled space. He stopped a foot away from her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Elara let out a shaky breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. A tear, a single, traitorous tear of relief and adrenaline, slipped down her cheek. "I'm fine," she whispered. I've never done anything like that before." "You were magnificent," he said, and the word was a caress. He reached up and, with a tenderness that seemed impossible from a man like him, brushed the tear from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was electric, sending a shiver through her entire body. "I told you, you are the smartest person in any room. Now everyone else knows it too." He dropped his hand, but his gaze held hers. "My offer still stands. I want you to come work for me, not as a consultant on loan, permanently, as the head of my private financial intelligence unit. You'll have a team, a budget, and the authority to investigate anything and anyone within my organization. No more back desks, no more Gerald Merriweathers, just the truth and the power to act on it." It was everything she had ever wanted: validation, respect, a place where her mind was her greatest asset. But as she looked into his pale gray eyes, she knew it was more than a job offer. It was an invitation into his world, into his life, a dangerous, dark, and utterly compelling life. I need to think about it," she said, her voice steadier now. "Of course," he said, Take all the time you need. But know this, Elara, I don't just want your mind. I find I have become accustomed to your presence, your quiet strength, your Earl Grey tea, the way you chew on your highlighter when you're thinking. A hint of a smile played on his lips. My world is a brutal one, but with you in it, it feels a little less dark. The confession hung in the air, raw and honest. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something more profound. It was an acknowledgement of a need that went beyond business, a need for her specific, quiet, brilliant light. She didn't go back to Vance and Merriweather. She couldn't. The thought of that humming, cramped back desk felt like a cage she could never re-enter. She took a few days off, staying in her apartment, the weight of Julian's offer and his words pressing on her. She thought about the danger, the moral ambiguity of working for a man like him. But she also thought about the way he had looked at her, not at her body, but at her. The way he had defended her honor, without a second thought. The way his touch on her cheek had felt like a promise. On the third day, Gerald Merriweather called her. His voice was a pathetic mix of bluster and pleading. Elara, this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. I've always valued your contributions. I'm prepared to offer you a senior associate position, a corner office, a significant raise. She cut him off. I quit, Gerald. Effective immediately. My formal resignation will be on your desk, typed on your own letterhead, with the incorrect logo placement I've been meaning to tell you about for 2 years. Goodbye. She hung up, a fierce, triumphant joy flooding her veins. She was free. She called Julian. I'll take the job, she said when he answered. On one condition. Name it. No more glass walls. I can't work in a fishbowl. His low chuckle was a warm rumble in her ear. Done. I'll have the walls of your new office painted anything you like. I'd suggest a deep emerald green. It suits you. Her new office was on the same floor as his, but it was a sanctuary of warm wood and soft lighting, with a door that closed. Her team was hand-picked, a group of brilliant, misfit analysts who, like her, saw the world in patterns and anomalies. She became the silent, unseen guardian of the Castellan Empire, her reputation a whispered legend in the underworld. The curvy taxwoman who had found the missing millions and brought down the Golden Prince. But it was the quiet moments with Julian that became the true center of her new life. It started with shared pots of Earl Grey in his office, late at night, after the rest of the building had gone dark. He would ask her about her day, genuinely listening, as she explained a complex shell company structure. She would ask him about his, and he would tell her, in his low, measured voice, about the legitimate businesses he was trying to build, the legacy he wanted to leave that wasn't written in blood. He was a man of violence, but he was also a man of surprising, deep intellect and a profound, aching loneliness. He learned her. He learned that she was terrified of thunderstorms, a remnant of a childhood trauma she never spoke of. During the first violent storm of the autumn, he found her in her office, flinching at every crack of thunder. He didn't say a word. He just pulled a chair up beside her, took her hand in his, and sat with her in the dark until the storm passed, his thumb tracing slow, soothing circles on her skin. She learned him. She learned that the framed photograph on his desk, the one always turned away, was of his mother, a woman with a kind smile and sad eyes, who had died when he was young. She learned that the vintage maps on his wall were of places he dreamed of visiting, a fantasy of escape from the life he was born into. She learned that his coldness was a fortress, built to protect a core of fierce, unwavering loyalty to the few people he loved. The attraction between them was a slow-burning fire, fed by stolen glances and accidental touches. It was in the way his fingers would brush hers when he handed her a file. It was in the way her breath would catch when he leaned over her shoulder to look at her screen, his scent of cedar and smoke enveloping her. It was a physical ache, a magnetic pull that grew stronger every day. The breaking point came on a quiet Thursday evening. They were in his office, the city lights twinkling below them, like a scattered box of diamonds. They had been working on a new project, a legitimate venture capital fund to invest in women-led tech startups. Elara's idea. She was explaining the due diligence process, her passion for the project making her eyes shine. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress, the color of aged wine, and her hair was pinned up, exposing the elegant curve of her neck. Julian wasn't listening to her words anymore. He was just watching her, his gray eyes dark and intense. She stopped mid-sentence, suddenly self-conscious. "What? Is there something on my face?" "No," he said, his voice rough. "I was just thinking that I have spent my entire life surrounded by beautiful things. Art, architecture, women who look like they stepped out of magazines. And none of it has ever moved me. None of it has ever made me feel less alone." He took a step closer. "Until you, with your purple highlighter and your Earl Grey tea and your brilliant, beautiful mind. You are the most stunning thing I have ever seen, Elara. Not despite your curves, but because of them. Because they are part of you. And I want all of you." It was the most raw, unguarded thing he had ever said. The fortress walls were down, and the man standing before her was just a man, vulnerable and wanting. Elara's heart felt like it was going to burst. All her life, she had been made to feel like her body was an apology, something to be hidden, something that disqualified her from passion and romance. And here was this powerful, dangerous, beautiful man, telling her it was her, all of her, that he wanted. She closed the distance between them. She reached up and placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath the expensive fabric. "Julian," she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. That was all the invitation he needed. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch both fierce and infinitely gentle, and kissed her. It was not a soft, tentative kiss. It was a claiming, a desperate, hungry meeting of mouths that spoke of months of pent-up longing. He kissed her, like she was the air he needed to breathe. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his jacket, pulling him closer. His hands slid from her face, down her neck, over her shoulders, tracing the curve of her waist, her hips, as if he were memorizing the landscape of her body. He wasn't just kissing her, he was worshipping her. He pulled back, his breathing ragged, his forehead resting against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment you corrected Gerald Merriweather about your job title," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Elara laughed, a breathless, joyful sound. "That was the moment I decided you might not be a complete monster." He smiled, a real, full smile that reached his eyes and made him look like a different person. "I am a monster, Elara, to everyone else, but never to you. With you, I just want to be Julian." He led her to the deep leather sofa in the corner of his office, a place for informal meetings that had never seen a meeting like this. He sat down and pulled her onto his lap, his arms wrapping around her, holding her close. They didn't rush. They talked for hours, between slow, deep kisses and tender caresses. He asked her about her dreams, her fears, the story of every scar on her heart. She asked him about his mother, his burdens, the weight of the crown he wore. They undressed each other's souls, long before they undressed their bodies. When they finally came together, it was a revelation. It was slow and tender and passionate, a physical conversation where every touch said, "I see you," and every sigh answered, "I am seen." He made her feel not just desired, but cherished, not just beautiful, but powerful. He traced the lines of her stretch marks with his lips and whispered that they were the map of her strength. He held her curves in his hands and told her she was a masterpiece. For the first time in her life, Elara felt completely, utterly, and unconditionally at home in her own skin. In the quiet aftermath, they lay tangled together on the sofa, a cashmere throw pulled over them. The city lights painted shadows on the ceiling. Elara's head was resting on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, a sound that now felt like her own personal metronome of safety. "What happens now?" she whispered into the darkness. Julian's arms tightened around her. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Now, we build something. Together. The venture capital fund. A new legacy. One that you design. And I will spend every day of my life making sure you never feel overlooked again. You are not the back desk girl, Elara. You are the center of my world." The next morning, she walked into the Castellan Enterprises lobby, not through the private elevator, but through the main entrance. She was wearing a new, perfectly tailored crimson suit that celebrated every curve. Her head was held high. Julian was waiting for her by the elevators, a cup of Earl Grey tea in his hand, made just the way she liked it. He handed it to her, and in front of the stunned morning crowd of employees, he leaned down and kissed her, a soft, possessive, and utterly public declaration. As the elevator doors closed, taking them up to their shared floor, Elara caught a glimpse of a familiar, blotchy red face in the crowd. Gerald Merriweather was there, a stack of papers in his hand, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. He was probably there to grovel for a contract, to try and claw back some scrap of the business he had lost after Julian blacklisted his firm. He saw her. He saw the crimson suit, the powerful man's arm around her waist, the look of pure, unadulterated happiness on her face. Elara Vance, the curvy tax consultant he had tried to hide, was now the most powerful woman in the room, and everyone, especially Gerald Merriweather, could finally see it. The back desk was a distant memory. She had found the missing millions, but more importantly, she had found herself, and in the arms of a Mafia boss who saw her soul, she had found a love that was worth more than all the money in the world.